Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session that's entitled Make Your Technology Strategy a Reality. My name is Rodnie Williams, and I will be presenting today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we start. Number one, this is the session that I've outlined here, and if you're in the wrong session, we'll give you a minute to jump out and get into the right one. But I would say plan on probably about a 40 to 45-minute presentation. If you have questions during the session, feel free to drop those into the chat. And then at the end, we can take some time and answer those questions, and feel free to make comments as well. But we'll address those at the end of the session, and then hopefully give us an opportunity to maybe wrap up a few minutes early and give people a quick break prior to jumping into their next session. So just a little bit about me to give you some perspective about kind of my point of view and where I'm coming from. So I've been in the industry a little over 35 years, board certified in security management, and have spent a lot of my time doing some of the same things that you guys are doing in terms of being a practitioner and working in large domestic and global organizations, helping them build their security programs, whether it's a risk-based approach, technology roadmaps, large-scale integrations, integrating disparate technologies, building GSOCs and that kind of stuff, and really, doing the same day-to-day stuff that you guys are doing. I spent about 15 years doing consulting work for large global and domestic organizations in the security space and doing that kind of work. Today, I work mostly with clients on strategic security planning, kind of across those core areas that I referenced as part of this bio. And I'm looking forward to talking today a little bit about how to kind of bring that strategy into reality focus and how you can go about executing against your strategy and across your organizations. And just want to thank everybody for taking time out of what I know are incredibly busy schedules to attend the session and some of the different insight sessions, and thank you for joining this one today. I think one of the things that would be good to start with is really just having a conversation a little bit about strategic context. And so when you think about what's going on in the industry right now, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the market, I learned this from a marketing person. Marketers look at strategic context of their markets. What are the demographics? Who are the customers they're trying to serve? What kind of headwinds are there, and that sort of thing. And I think it makes some sense for us to really think about strategic context for us in the security industry and for our businesses. One of the biggest things, obviously, we know there's a lot of different technology innovations that are out there, a lot of conversation around digital transformation, and we have been through similar sorts of conversations before, whether it was, migration to IP or convergence or different, major trends that were going on in the industry. I think that the big difference right now with digital transformation is not only, the pace of the change, but also just the notion that, we are in the midst of what some people are calling a fourth industrial revolution. And the implications of this are not just exclusively to the security industry. The implications are much broader, both in our personal lives and then also in our businesses as well. And it's an important thing for us to be able to have as we're thinking about our technology strategies. A couple of big buckets, no surprises here, global pandemic, everything that's been going on for quite some time, and the impacts that's had to our businesses, real estate transformation, investment impact, other sorts of disruptions. I think that civil unrest and active threats are really a major driver for us in terms of how we're thinking about our programs. And one of the big reasons that is having worked in organizations, global organizations, historically, we would be dealing with, civil unrest and protests outside the U.S., but really fundamentally seeing a shift into the U.S. and the heavy presence of that certainly helps us to think about things differently. The active threat stuff kind of going off the charts even over the last 60 days in terms of just the number of bad events that we have going on. Really kind of driving the need for better security crisis management, more proactive approach to how we're doing things and how we're thinking about things. I was working with a large critical manufacturing firm who was in an urban environment, was kind of thinking about, okay, what do we need to think about for protest planning? You know, you have upcoming trials and a variety of things that they're trying to take into consideration. And one of the things that I was talking to them about is, you know, really you have to think about it through the lens of flashpoint events. And what I mean by that is, you know, the next traffic stop that goes bad could be outside your location, and you could be ground zero for something that you weren't planning on. So again, major trend that we need to be looking at and thinking about. And then really workforce trends. I think everything from the duty of care stuff that's evolving and changing. Another kind of sad note that, you know, obviously we deal with lots of threats in the workplace. We've seen a decrease in those threats with a lot of work at home stuff, simply because there's less friction in the environment, less people. But the sad issue about all of this, or the sad point is that domestic violence has increased significantly during COVID and during the pandemic lockdown and that sort of a thing. And I think it's something that we need to bear in mind, particularly with return to work strategies and how we may see an increase in those sorts of things and need to be thinking about them. So there are lots of things that could go into a slide like this, lots of strategic context considerations. But I think between the technology stuff, the digital transformation stuff, and then just kind of these major trends, it really kind of sets the tone for us thinking about the types of programs that we need to develop for organizations, and you know, just as importantly, the technology roadmaps that we put together. One of the things that I like to think about when you're trying to build a security program and a technology roadmap for your organization is just the sheer critical importance of aligning your strategy to the overall business strategy of the organization. So, kind of first major point is ground your strategy, ground your technology strategy in and make sure that it's aligned to the vision, mission, values of your organization. And I think that, you know, fundamentally, we may be in different verticals that have, you know, different compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, whether it's, you know, something like CFATS or FISMA or GLB and financial services or HIPAA and healthcare, you know, whatever the case may be. We're going to have different nuances, but at the end of the day, we're all focused kind of on those same core missions, right? We're trying to protect the assets of the organization. We're trying to mitigate risk. We're trying to protect our people, protect our reputation, and protect, you know, shareholder value. So one of the things I encourage people to do is to really understand your organization from the top down. And what I mean by that is, you know, how does the board of directors think about risk? How do they talk about it? If you go out and look at your 10K, you have board identified risks that are in there. What's the executive leadership team thinking about and talking about? What are your key initiatives? What are your overall growth strategies? Is your growth over the next 5 years coming through acquisitions? Is it coming through organic growth? Are you trying to, you know, trim some fat from an operational perspective and trying to take costs out of the business? You know, what are those major overarching strategies? And the reason these are so important and the reason it's so important to align your program is, you know, eventually you need to, when you come forward and you're looking for investment, not only do you need to be able to demonstrate return on investment or put together a good cost benefit of analysis, but you also need to have a story that goes along with that, and that story needs to align to the business strategy, or you kind of miss 50% of what you need to bring forward. And I think that you know, a really simple example of this is in talking with organizations. You know, your technology strategy, your CIO may be saying, "Hey, we're getting out of the data center business. We're going to start trying to push everything to the cloud, right? We want to reduce the number of applications that we're supporting inside the organization." And you're staring at the end of a life cycle, you know, obsolete access control system. You need a big bucket of money to go get that replaced. And if you come forward with a strategy for an on-prem deployment, when your CIO has clearly articulated a strategy for SaaS-based, you know, technology strategy going forward, you're kind of missing 50% of the conversation. So again, just a sheer critical importance of understanding the business strategy, doing your homework, going out and listening to the earnings call, reading your annual report, looking at that 10K, some of these things that I've mentioned to really help you form and be able to put forward to the you know, go forward basis from a strategy perspective. Second thing, really, you know, I talk about on this first slide, I mentioned a little bit about shareholder value. The second thing we really need to understand is think about that compelling mandate from your CEO. And what I mean by that is, some people are really good at security of the business, and we're all practitioners, and that's what we focus on. But we need to be good at the business of security. And what I mean by that is bringing that business acumen to bear so that it can help you figure out how to be successful and not only delivering what your organization needs to support the organizational strategy and growth plans, but also to make sure that you can get funding for the key initiatives that you need in order to be successful. I think about three major buckets in terms of delivering a program. One, can you provide competitive advantage to the organization? Two, are you aligning to stakeholder value expectations? And then three, at a minimum kind of table stakes, you need to make sure that you're ensuring legal and regulatory compliance. So how does that come to life? Well, in providing competitive advantage, providing a strong cost structure is really important. And what I mean by that is, looking at your metrics, your cost to deliver on a per square foot basis, cost to deliver per employee, per dollar of revenue, whatever that measurement is, right? Being effective, because the lower your cost is, the more competitive you can make the business. The second thing is trying to bring forward some technology-driven business intelligence. And what I mean by that is, the example I like to use is I was working with an organization. They were putting in an identity management platform to serve as a middleware between some disparate access control systems. And when we looked at some of the cost benefits and headcount gains and process efficiency gains and that sort of thing, while there was some value in that, when we started talking about how we were going to be able to bring forward occupancy utilization information and reporting in terms of how the business was using the space that they're using, everybody got really excited about that, and we were able to help them focus on trying to get the right number of seats for the right number of people and how the space was being used. And for large organizations, when you look at the middle of the income statement, you're looking at labor, and you're looking at real estate as a couple of major levers. So we were able to show them how they could leverage that for strategic occupancy utilization, and therefore, take costs out of the middle of the income statement. Another thing to think about from a stakeholder value expectation perspective, internal, external customers, maybe it's regulatory agencies. The big thing that I tell people to focus on from a customer perspective is really the sorts of agreements that we have from a contractual perspective. So if you really want to know what your end customers expect from your organization as it relates to security, if you can get your hands on some of the contracts and what they lay out there in terms of security expectations, it'll really help you inform why you're doing what you're doing, and you're able to demonstrate that and kind of parrot that back to the business in terms of your strategy and the technologies you're delivering. Board and executive leadership kind of goes hand in hand in terms of what those stakeholders expect, and we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation here about how we're going to get after those stakeholders and figure out what they're actually looking for. And the last, kind of a no-brainer, I think, regulatory compliance. Again, a cost of doing business is something that's necessary, and nobody wants to testify before a Senate subcommittee. So we need to make sure we're minding the shop in that regard. So be in the business of security. Figure out again what the CEO is looking for you and from your organization. And the last note that I would make on this topic is that I had a professor in a class one time asked us the question of why cash was king in a publicly held company. And a lot of people are like, well, you need it for investing, you need it for these different things. And at the end of the day, his response was, the reason the cash is king in a publicly held company is because if management doesn't generate enough of it, the shareholders will throw them out. So it kind of makes everything kind of narrows the cone of uncertainty in terms of kind of what's compelling around shareholder value and how the C-suite's thinking about these things. So first big point, right? You want to make decisions. You want to build a technology roadmap and a program that's grounded in strategy, the strategy of your organization. Second major kind of point in this regard is decisions grounded in financials. One of the big things that I've experienced, and I've experienced it myself, both being a practitioner and then also working with clients in different situations, is that a lot of people don't really have a good handle on the total cost of their program today. And that's what I mean by a total cost of ownership model. And if you think about it, some of you today have responsibility between contracts and third parties and guard services and integrators. and resources and everything else, and you could be running, 10, 5, 10, 15, $20 million plus business in terms of, the amount of financial responsibility you have. Excuse me. So when you're thinking about that, make a friend in finance and help you get together kind of a total understanding of what your cost is today. That does involve, CapEx. It involves operational expenditures as well. Really being able to get your head wrapped around that is going to be important for the exercise of kind of stepping through, okay, if this is where we are today, this is what our total cost of ownership is, and this is where we want to go in the future. What's the benefit of that? What's the cost benefit analysis? And you're going to be looking at everything from, process costs, headcount, contracted headcount, software, hardware, energy utilization, right? There are a lot of things that can actually wrap into that total cost model. And then you go into that cost benefit analysis process, understand your requirements, where you're going to go, what those costs and benefits are going to be if you are able to execute against the future state. You're going to assign and make assumptions and assign a dollar value to those costs and benefits, and then look at the alternative options, rip and replace versus going to a middleware versus going to the cloud, right? These are the sorts of things that go into this process. But the third thing that I also see sometimes that gets missed is that people don't figure out what their future state, steady state support model looks like. So you can kind of go through all this and say, hey, we're going to have all this savings and everything else. But in the end, what's it going to cost you to maintain and run the future state of your technology, and then also just the future state of your program? And we'll talk a little bit more. There are more variables than just kind of cost in this conversation. But again, decisions surrounded in financials. Make a friend if you don't already have one, or you don't have somebody in your organization that understands finances, that understands how the organization measures, net present value, internal rate of return, and all these, complicated financial topics. Help them understand, help you understand how to put together CVA and a return on investment as you're going forward with your program. The other thing that I think sometimes gets missed in all this, right, is people frequently talk about return on investment. And don't get me wrong, return on investment is important. Cost benefit analysis is important as well. But the reality is I've been personally involved in millions of dollars of funding efforts that weren't necessarily some big, huge return on investment. So really, a lot of that value, a lot of that cost benefit, again, you can start to assign the benefit of what some people call risk buy down or risk reduction. And so you have to look at this through the lens of the cost of not investing in your security program and being able to articulate what those things are, and also be able to articulate either based on prior incident history, other industry benchmarking, talking to your insurance folks, and really getting a sense for how can we frame this up, how can we demonstrate it. And so the cost of not investing in a security program is important to that story just as much as what the cost of investing is. And then the other thing is I think of things to this yield curve that I discovered a while back, and what I tell people is if you're looking to make investment in your organization, you're looking for new technologies, then there's got to be it's either compelling that it's going to create competitive differentiation, it's going to meet stakeholder obligations, it's going to help us be in compliance, but it's some way, shape, or form, right, that the current state that you're in is leaking value from your organization. So what's that investment required to get us back to where we need to be, kind of that midpoint to where we're creating acceptable value? And then that steady state support model is what do I need to invest to maintain versus invest to grow? We all know that we would love to be able to get, millions of dollars every year. Probably not going to be likely. Unfortunately, security, like lots of times, is seen as a growth inhibitor, not a growth enabler. And what I'd like to propose is that, in the security business, we are about helping the organization secure profitability and meet all those expectations. And in doing so, we're going to need some level of investment on an annual basis, but we're not going to come in and ask for, 20, 30, 40 million dollars a year after year. We'd love to, but we probably can't build a case. So if you kind of buy in a little bit to the theory that I've laid out so far, get grounded in financials, understand your total cost of ownership, start to get a story put together, figure out what a cost benefit looks like, really start to make sure you're aligned to the overall strategy. You know where things are going, you know what your IT strategy is. You know, you kind of work through that front end piece of it. You know, a good place I tell people I think to start is really assessing organizational readiness. And I do have some training. I'm a green belt in Six Sigma. Your organization may, you know, have a lean methodology or a different quality methodology. Maybe they use an agile, you know, development method, whatever the latest trend or the latest craze is, right, in your organization. You know, in the end, I would follow that kind of methodology. But what you're doing is you're starting with some voice of the customer, right? So figuring out who those stakeholders are, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Doing interviews with them, looking at your IT strategy, looking at those strategic initiatives, what the board has to say, and really what you're doing is you're documenting and defining what the voice of the customer says, and then that in turn will tell you what your critical customer requirements are in terms of the type of program that you need to deliver to your organization. And so when you go through an organizational readiness assessment, if you've done that voice of the customer, you've kind of interviewed those stakeholders, you have a good sense for what your critical customer requirements are, you kind of have to be brutally honest with yourself. And being brutally honest, you have to ask some really hard questions. One, how compelling is your strategy? Does it align to organizational goals and objectives and business strategy? If you're looking at bringing forward new capabilities and you know you're going to bring forward some new technologies, are they going to be able to provide measurable benefit? Were you able to kind of think about that through your cost benefit analysis? What kind of buy-in do you have from people who have a lot of influence and are going to be impacted by the change? We'll talk about that in just a minute or two here on the next slide. And really understanding who those people are and socializing kind of your concepts through the conversation and doing the voice of the customer feedback. Are you able to really support, or I'm sorry, are you feeling strongly that you'll be able to get them to support the effort and where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get done? Don't get too distracted from your core mission. So making sure that you understand what the impact might be. You end up you know, building something that looks cool that the business is excited about, but you didn't first understand whether or not the technology, you know, works as advertised, or number two, understand all the resourcing that you were going to need or how difficult it would be to execute against the change, how long, you know, the implementation is going to take. There's lots of things that you want to make sure that you don't take your eye off of your core business. And then again, really understanding good business use cases and what the user experience impacts would be for your organization. So really, again, an encouragement to, after you get through some of this front end stuff, to really start to think about what your organization is prepared for and if they're ready for some of the sorts of change that you would be talking about. We talked a little bit about stakeholder assessment and engagement plans. I think that an easy way to think about this is really just kind of going through a stakeholder analysis. This is something you can do. Grab a piece of paper, do it on a whiteboard, and just do a 4-panel like this. You look up the x-axis and really what you're looking at from low to high, stakeholders, and what I would say functions are a good place to start. And then you'll probably maybe even get down to the level of or particular leaders. So it may be a person or it may be a group or a function within your organization. So the first thing that you're trying to do is understand, all right, how much influence do these people have in the organization? Does this group have or does this individual have? And as you look along the y-axis, right, you're really thinking about impact to change, right? And I actually flip-flop those, so I'm sorry, disregard my X, Y. But you look at level of influence and level of impact by change, right? So when you get this figured out, you've done kind of this informs your stakeholder interview process, right? In terms of the people that you need to talk to. It starts to tell you and starts to make sense, you know, really, how are people going to respond to this? Who do you need to keep on board? Who do you need to engage? Who do you just simply need to communicate to and let them be aware of it? And so, you know, I think about this and I think about the people in the upper right-hand corner and really, you know, those people, those key players. You're going to want, you know, maybe somebody from those functions on your executive steering committee. Maybe they'll even be members from your project management team or members of your project management team that would support, right? And they're going to help you not only with kind of driving and selling the change into the organization, but they're going to help you define it. They're going to help you put together that communication, change management training plan that you need to pull together in order to execute against your new technology strategy and your new program. So one of the other things, just kind of again borrowing from our marketing partners, SWOT analysis, and stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Some people, when they first see this tool or they see an output of this tool, they don't think it necessarily applies to their function. I would contend that this is an excellent way to really dig in and take a hard look at your function, at the capabilities that you're delivering to your organization. And one of the really good places to start with is what are your weaknesses? And again, this is one of those scenarios where you have to be brutally honest with yourself and answer questions about, what kind of skills do you lack? What kind of talent do you need that you don't have today? How are you perceived by the organization? How they see you? What's your internal kind of brand to the organization? And, kind of going through these questions and documenting them and thinking through them, talking with your teams, maybe even layering some of that into your stakeholder interview process, helps you start to form some opinions about where you need to go and where you need to take your program. An example about what skills do we lack, from an alarm monitoring perspective, most operation centers have always done alarm monitoring, has always kind of been there as a base, set of skills. But if you start looking at that, you say, hey, we really need to develop a strong risk intelligence program, or we need to develop a strong insider threat program, then chances are the people that are doing your alarm monitoring don't have the same skills and talents that you would need to execute against your future state strategy if you were going to develop those sorts of programs. So that's just kind of an example from a weakness perspective. The threat side of the equation, we talked a little bit early on, strategic context in terms of how things are changing. How has that evolving threat landscape domestically and globally impacted your business? What's different? And how do you need to think about things differently? How do you need to change in terms of the services and capabilities that you deliver to your organization? What needs to change, and how are threats informing that? Strength. That's interesting if you really talk to your stakeholders and understand what they value about you. It helps kind of inform what your unique value proposition, your brand proposition, your brand experience to the organization is inside your organization. And I think one of the things that you kind of have to work through as you're trying to understand what that unique value proposition is do people see you as somebody that's in the way of earlier I talked about, the way of progress or the way of change. Earlier I talked about the notion that are you seen as a growth inhibitor or a growth enabler? When there's the next new product launch or the next new major initiative, is security at the table as a business partner, not only talking about risk, but also adding value and figuring out how it's going to impact you and your organization? Or is it that people come to you after the fact and you're scrambling trying to figure out how to get a new product secured in the way that it needs to be secured, as an example? And so I think that if you go through this, again, if you're brutally honest, you kind of go through that painstaking process, what ends up happening is that you're able to figure out what your unique value proposition is today and what it needs to be in the future, and if it needs to change, and that'll kind of inform the path that you need to take in terms of trying to bring that about. Opportunities, it's everybody's busy. Anybody that you talk to, how's it going? Oh, I'm busy, just busy, right? So there's no doubt that everybody is doing a bunch of work. Maybe there are a few people that are lollygagging, but they'll get found out eventually. At the end of the day, I think the hard question to ask is, what do we need to stop doing? What are we doing today that's not lined up to the strategy? What are we doing today that's not providing value? What do we need to stop? What do we need to start? What's new technologies? What new ideas? What new products can we leverage? Can we bring to bear to really help our organization? Talk a little bit about technology roadmap. And so, kind of the thought process again is we talked about strategic context of what's going on, aligning to the business strategy, understand what the C-suite's thinking about, starting to get together a story, grounding our decisions in financials and cost benefit analysis, We talked about organizational readiness and stakeholder segmentation, and really, doing that SWOT analysis. There's a lot of front end stuff to really bring us to a place to where we can start to articulate our technology roadmap. And I would contend, or I would maintain, that if you try to start at the end and say, hey, we want to implement this new technology, or we're going to completely migrate everything to the cloud, all it is a concept, right? It's just kind of something that's hanging out there without all that pre-work, right? Because we're always selling. No matter what we're doing, we're trying to influence people to look at things the way we look at it, people that we don't have control over. We're competing for resources and investments and everything else. So you got to kind of do that front end heavy lifting in order to get you a place to where you can start to build out a solid technology roadmap. So, I think about this in three kind of major buckets. One, first get clear on your future state, and that first kind of major row with discovery, clarify, future state, and current state review. So that really means, hey, you got to do some of the stuff we've talked about, gather your data, do your stakeholder analysis. You need to lay out what that future state vision is, and then laying out that vision kind of in plain business language and being able to articulate in plain business language. You need to show how it aligns to the overall business strategy. You need to show how it's going to deliver, new capabilities and new value to the business. But you also need to be able to articulate what your performance metrics are. And this is such a huge, important thing to focus on, because you can say, this is my vision, but you also need to be able to say, and this is how we're going to measure our performance. This is how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And one of the really simple examples that I like to use is, I take a balanced scorecard approach, which is the way that I learned to look at financial metrics. So to look at metrics. So you look at a financial bucket, you look at learning and growth, you look at a process bucket, and you look at a customer satisfaction bucket. And a lot of people will say, well, it's hard for us to measure customer satisfaction because we don't have any direct interaction with our customers, so to speak. And so the way I look at it is, the thing that I love is net promoter score. Now, some of you may have heard of this. Everybody may have heard of it, but NPS is something big. It's a lot of organizations use it, and I'm oversimplifying it. But basically, net promoter score is how would somebody rate your services in terms of whether or not they would, tell somebody else to use them. Right? We all get these, surveys, whether we're calling in somewhere or going to, the local clinic, or whatever the case may be. How's our service? All this stuff. They're trying to measure net promoter score. So promoter can kind of inform how satisfied were people with the services, but how likely are they to stick with you? So loyalty is a component of that, and how likely would they be to promote you to somebody else? What I tell people is, if you're in a business that measures NPS, if you're in a business that measures different things, you should adopt the same metrics. And so your net promoter score is going to be how your end users of your services, right? So the people that are out there serving people in the clinic environment, how easy is it for them to use your security services? How responsive are you when they have a threat of violence, or when they have a problem that something needs to get fixed, right? And what kind of feedback would they give you? And again, that shows compelling alignment to the overall business strategy, and is meaningful to people in terms of seeing how you're talking about measuring your program. So performance metrics, again, I talked about, stakeholder analysis, voice of customer interviews, understanding regulatory considerations, and then really you start to dig into those gaps. If this is where we want to get to, this is how we're going to measure our performance. This is what our stakeholders are saying, critical to them. This is what we see, the tea leaves we read about our organizational growth strategy and our business plans and our IT strategy, and we come up with, and we're like, we feel pretty good about this is it, and this is where we're going to go. I know some people say, hey, we want to future-proof our technology, and we want a 5-year roadmap. And I would contend that the 5-year roadmap is difficult based on how rapidly technology is changing right now. And so what that really means is that you might have to think about having 3 to 5 year strategic imperatives or mile markers, but not necessarily strategies around specific technology platforms. So for example, as opposed to say, I'm going to standardize on this access control system, and that's what I'm going to do for the next 5 years, you may say, hey, 5 years from now, I want to be completely migrated to the cloud to sync up with the SaaS-based strategy that our CIOs laid out. So again, you've got to kind of balance putting together that roadmap, but also being able to, balance how rapidly the technology is changing. But once you've got that, understood and it's laid out, you need to understand what those gaps are, where we're at today, and then how do you get from point A to point B. And so getting from point A to point B, not only do you need to understand what your gaps are, but you develop that roadmap in the context of what are your business requirements, what sort of capabilities are you going to be delivering to the organization, what are they expecting from you, new capabilities, maybe existing capabilities, things that you haven't even thought of. That'll help you define, again, concept of operations. And then really, as you're putting together capabilities, I think about organizational capabilities. So not just what technology do I need, but what are the organizational capabilities? So you look at process, you look at structure, how are we going to organize around the work? You look at assets that you would need. And yes, that is technology assets, but there are other things that you may need. And then the final piece of that really has to do with focusing on the talent. And we talked about that a little bit ago, right, in terms of what kind of talent you would need to execute against that. If you can get through that front end heavy lifting of kind of building your overall approach and understanding your organization and having that put together, and walk through this exercise of building a future, building the metrics, understand your business requirements, understand your organizational capabilities, then you can come out of that with a strategic roadmap. You can have an implementation plan, you can have a cost benefit analysis, and put together your overall story, which I've been kind of going on about throughout the course of this conversation, to really make sure that you have that overall story lined up, because stories 50% of kind of getting it over the finish line, so to speak. So these are the things that I would focus on from a technology roadmap perspective, and kind of how I would go about putting together and how I've seen other organizations do it, and again, kind of a framework and a methodology. So when you actually put together a technology roadmap, I like to think about this. I mentioned the whole issue of kind of 5 years seems a little daunting given everything and the way things are right now. So I would focus on kind of what's going to happen the next 18 months, and then what's going to happen after that. And so if you look at the first column, right, you look at key focus areas. So there are 3 major work streams that I would focus on from a technology roadmap. The first is just operations. And what I mean by that is you have to keep the trains run on time today. You have to deliver the services that you're delivering today, making sure you have stable and redundant systems, looking to make sure your architecture is squared away, your applications and infrastructures are working. And maybe over the next 18 months, you're going to kind of start to focus on which platform you're going to focus on for that period of time, tightening up some different things, starting to think about maybe evolving some of the work that you're doing in a risk intelligence program. And again, this is you fill in the blanks. I'm trying to give you a framework and a methodology. But then the future state piece of it, right, is I really need to start thinking hard about KPIs and really looking at my lifecycle asset management plan. If you don't have one in place today, it's a major myth for us and we have the industry to thank for this. It's kind of a bittersweet thing. Historically, the security industry has had a run to fail strategy on most of our infrastructure. And in doing that, stuff was built and it ran a really long time. But if we look at IT, right, most organizations, you're getting a new laptop every 5 to 7 years, which syncs up with annual planning strategies, syncs up with the depreciation approach, and how you do that in your organizations. And so when a senior executive comes up and swipes their badge on the door, they see a card reader. If they look up, they see a camera, but they don't really understand that there are servers and hardware and infrastructure behind that needs to support it. And we need to educate our organization so that we can build a good lifecycle asset management plan and have that structure in place. That's the first major work stream. Get focused, make sure you're keeping the trains running on time. Second major work stream, business strategy alignment. So what have you learned? What are those growth plans and what's the impact? How do you see that impacting you and what you do for the organization? Evolving operating model. Again, what changes are coming if your business is looking to reinvent itself over the next 5 years? Then you start to put together that strategic technology roadmap. You start to look at risk-based investing. One size does not fit all. Data center has a different risk posture than a small sales office somewhere in the Midwest. We need to plan and invest accordingly. Risk-based investing says that you invest in people, process, and technology the most where you have the greatest concentration of risk, and coming up with a way to assess your portfolio and your program and understand how you can build a risk-based program and make sure that you're investing in the right areas. Very compelling, particularly to the finance folks. And then from there, really just looking kind of in that future state, how are you maturing your program against the growth strategy of the business, against how the business is evolving, what's going to need to change for you, and capabilities that are supported with your financial model, and again, support the overall business strategy. The third major thing that you have to do, and I know you're probably thinking if I was in your shoes, I'd be thinking the same thing, like I don't even have time to go to the bathroom, let alone try to figure all this stuff out. Well, the third area that I would maintain that you need to focus on is the opportunity to innovate. So lots of cool stuff out there, and hey, I'm all for it. Some people are slow adopters from a technology perspective. Some people are really fast adopters. At the end of the day, as we've all experienced in one way, shape, or form, the stuff doesn't always work as advertised. So my point is hey, why don't you get an R&D project, capability going, having a lab, doing whatever the case may be, picking a new building, trying a new SaaS-based system, doing whatever, and use that to inform your cost-benefit analysis, take that ROI from the R&D projects, and really start to look at new capabilities and opportunities that you might be able to deliver to your organization. So again, that'll kind of inform your evolving model and support that idea of laying out some kind of strategic mile markers, points of view that you're going to head after, and it gives you a way to bring some new technologies into your organization. This key at the bottom of the slide really is just to say, hey, standardize on some stuff, figure out what you're going to continue to invest in, what you're going to run out, what you're going to install and maintain, and that sort of a thing is in support of this. Last thing, I mentioned this a little bit, it depends on your organization. Some organizations are really big into benchmarking, thought leadership, best practices. Some of those things I think everybody's into, but some people are really into organizational maturity models, and that's how they run their business. And if this is how your organization thinks about things, then it would bode well for you to develop really an approach to this and to show where you are on this model, on this maturity model, and the capabilities that you're trying to evolve. And yes, this isn't just related to technology, but you could make it just related to technology. So you can choose your whole program. You can look at a variety of different buckets, or you can focus exclusively on your systems and technology. And I think that really having this and showing this investment is going to move us to here. Here's where we need to be a par with our competition. And again, you get into all the risk reduction and some of the other sorts of things that we talk about, or I'm sorry, that we've been talking about. So just a couple of final things as we wrap up. We've got a couple more slides I want to jump to here from a presentation perspective. So really, smart collaboration as a business leader. SMART, many of you have heard, I'm sure, stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Sometimes our eyes are bigger than our stomach, and it's hard to, really get where we need to get to. So be smart, be collaborative, figure out who those stakeholders are, figure out what they're really looking for, aligning stuff to the business, as I've been talking about, doing the hard work, the heavy lifting. This requires some, brutally honest, brutally frank conversation internally, with your teams and with people you trust in the organization to help you kind of figure out where you need to go and what you need to do. Always focus on having a vision and delivering results. Do what you need to do today, provide that value, but remember, we need to get out ahead of the business and where they're going and build bridges so when the supply lines get there, they can get across and look for those quick wins. And don't underestimate the ability to leverage the ecosystem of the strategic partners that you have, whether it's, man guarding, integrators, manufacturers, councils, industry associations, and really people within your businesses that can provide a lot of input and support. And you're developing a business plan. If you have a 10, 15, 5, 10, 15, $20 million budget that you're managing, the way I like to think of it is you're running a $20 million business. And that's how you need to think about this. You run a business within a business, and you need to develop a plan that kind of touches on all those key things that we've been talking about. So the last slide is a quote from Winston Churchill: "However beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results." And I believe that to be the case. And really, it's interesting that, and this is several years ago I saw this, but Fortune 500 CEOs, 85% of them said they felt like they did a really good job. Their organizations did a really good job of developing strategy, but only 15% of them felt like they did a good job of executing against that strategy. So the devil's in the detail, and kind of nets out in the end in terms of our ability to execute and execute well. So if you have any comments, observations, or questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat if you haven't already. And then if you have any follow-up questions, comments, if you want to talk, feel free to give me a call. And/or if you get in touch with your Convergint colleague, they know how to get in touch with me if you want to have some additional conversation on this topic or other topics. So with that, I will check now and turn it back over and see if we have any questions from the audience or any comments. Said a few comments, just feedback on the session. I believe that the presentations and what have you are going to be made available at the end of the Insight Summit. So that was one question that came up. A couple of comments just in terms of the presentation itself. So thank you for those. So we'll give it just another minute. We're at about 217, 218. Doesn't look like there are any additional questions. So I'll stay on here for a couple, 3 more minutes. You're free to drop, obviously, if you'd like, but I'll stay on to see if any questions come through. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up the session. So thanks again for attending. Good luck with all your initiatives and everything you have going on, and stay safe out there. Okay, thanks again, everybody, for attending today. And again,